Welcome, all who consider themselves foolish enough to become champion of this arena. For this is the ring of blood, death, and decay. All who enter, even kings, will be at sacrifice. The Blood Ring Arena is the final test of any warrior's skill. A place to showcase everything you have learned and mastered in a duel to the death. The spectacle can be viewed by any, and tales of the ring's fights often travel far, luring challengers in for the hopes of fame and fortune. Others want to claim themselves the masters of death, and seek the power of the arena's crown to prove it. Perhaps, if fortune favors you, you will learn of your tale for being here. But for now, you best prepare for the trials ahead in the Blood Ring Arena. This video is here to showcase the first ever season of combatants wishing to enter into the Blood Ring Arena. 16 fighters have been paired off in a tournament to become king of the arena. This is a custom scenario for Warhammer the Old World. However, I have also provided rules if you are also a player of Warhammer Fantasy, any of the older editions, or Mordheim and wish to try the scenario out in those game types as well. You can find links to all of the proper ways to play in those game modes or Warhammer the Old World in the video description. With all that intro stuff out of the way, let's get a quick peek at the actual arena. There are many perils within the Blood Ring Arena beyond the combatants themselves. Spikes, pits, monsters, and even roaring fires of death spout out from ancient statues and columns throughout the arena, meaning it is just as important for one to be familiar with their surroundings as the combatant ahead of them. And let's not forget about the crowd above, watching these battles. They're known to be quite rambunctious and sometimes tamper with the results of what would have been a fair fight. So it can be very important to stay in their good graces. Speaking of which, I think I can hear the crowds starting to show up now. That must mean the fights are about to begin. Get ready for the first duel in the Blood Ring Arena. The stands are packed, but who are the fighters for the first match? Our first duelist is Lady Adamara, a dark elf sorceress. She is trained in the magic arts of demonology. And looks like for her first round of the duel, she's going to be using the Vortex of Chaos spell and the magic missile spell, the Summoning. Her combatant is a marauder chieftain that goes by the name of Angry Jack. He is the son of Ben, a warrior of Khorne. We'll have to see if over the course of this tournament he can earn that mark of Khorne and make his father proud. Looks like the fighters have entered into the arena, with the sorceress taking the king's left side of the arena and the marauder chieftain taking the right. We are starting this battle off with the elf taking nearby cover and conjuring a vortex of chaos. Looks like it was slightly out of range, but close to threatening the chieftain. Next up, she throws a magic missile at him, but with a lucky armor save, the chieftain comes out unscathed. He follows up all this magic shenanigans with a berserker charge forward, and a quick javelin throw that fails to wound the elf. However, it seems to have caused some panic in the elf. Some spectators also seem to be panicking as the elf's magic vortex begins scattering off towards them. The elf actually runs that direction as well, hoping her speed is enough to outrun the marauder's charge. It's not enough. The chieftain, son of Ben, closes in and gets a nasty gash in on the elf. Wounded, but not out, she swings back but fails to deal any damage. Backed up against the wall, the elf has little options than to go for another round in melee. The chieftain gets another wound through and wins the first round of the duel. The crowds are roaring, but the elf is not done yet. The fighters are escorted out, arena reset, and soon round 2 will begin. The fighters have now swapped sides and have their weapons at the ready. And the first move's about to be made. Round 2 starts off, and Angry Jack isn't wasting any time closing the gap. But it looks like the elf is conjuring up another nasty magic missile. This one gets a wound through on the chieftain. The blood being spilled erupts a roar of cheers from the crowd. This spell is followed up with her signature Vortex of Chaos, but no damage is done to the chieftain. It looks like the fight has lured in another combatant, though. A pit fighter is preparing himself to enter into the ring. But before the new combatant enters, Angry Jack lunges across the bridge over the toxic pit, a risk he will end up regretting, as he is now a prime target for another potent barrage of Dark Elf magic. It seems the reasoning for Angry Jack to position himself on that bridge is due to the new presence of that pit fighter. Even the Dark Elf sorceress has moved over to the other side of the arena, trying to create as much distance between her and that new fighter as possible. After some slight repositioning, she prepares her magical spells, and the Vortex of Chaos is conjured forth at the end of the bridge, and it just barely gets a wound through on the chieftain. But it proves to be too much for the warrior, and he falls into the pit, sustaining serious injuries, but not enough to stop him from settling the score once and for all. He drags himself out and prepares for his next opportunity. The round is not over, though, as the pit fighter now enters into the arena and prepares to steal the glory of the duel from the elf. Or so he thinks, as the elf quickly readies another magic missile, and upon its impact it splatters the pit fighter's body apart into a pile of gore. The dark elf revels in the violence and blood spilt, and prepares for her final round. The combatants have reset to their original sides, and round 3 will begin. For the glory of chaos! It's going to be a rough start for the elf, as she decides to hold her position and promptly fail to cast any of her spells. Angry Jack decides to take this opportunity to once again close the gap with the elf and head towards that bridge, throwing another javelin but failing to wound. The elf's turn is not looking any more promising. She repositions slightly and casts another magic missile, but has a careless conjuration during the process and nearly injures herself. Her follow-up spell is the deadly Vortex of Chaos, and like last time, it's going to be placed at the end of the bridge, hoping to block the chieftain's charge. It scatters across the bridge and has enough force to deal a wound to the marauder. He tries, throwing another javelin, but failing to hit. The elf is backed up against the wall with little options other than one last magical barrage or an all-out sprint. She decides to run for it and gets as much distance between the chieftain and any hazards that she might have behind her as possible. The following turn has the marauder charging the elf, but somehow failing to catch her as she retreats away. On her following turn, the elf manages to rally, gets the magic missile ready, and pow! The chieftain is down. The crowd goes wild. The elf is victorious. The dark elf sorceress has taken the first duel of the Blood Ring Arena. And it doesn't look like Jack's getting back up after that one, and another life is claimed to the arena as well. The elf will advance into the second stage of matches in this tournament, but we got a lot more to go when it comes to the first stage matches. And on that note, let's get a look at what some of these future pairings are going to be like. And this is the complete list of all of our fighters they're going to be trying to take the crown in the first season of the Blood Ring Arena. All their matchups have been randomized, and we've got some exciting ones ahead of us, with our next match being a vampire versus an ogre, and the final match is going to be a necromancer versus a witch hunter. So let's get back to the bloodshed and start the next duel. Next up, Vampire Kira Skulltaker versus Ogre Kirby Bigtooth. The match begins with the vampire advancing and taking cover in the center of the arena. Suddenly, a gurgling can be heard from the pipeworks throughout the arena, and a bursting of slime showers over the field. Luckily, both combatants are quick on their feet and only get a light coating of ooze. After that light showering, the ogre starts blasting with his pistol and lands a wound on the vampire. Enraged, the vampire makes a very long charge at the ogre and dodges some dangerous spikes along the way. The ogre wasn't expecting such a quick charge and failed to drink his potion of toughness in time for this melee. He even misses his stand and shoot attacks. The vampire attacks deal 2 wounds, but the ogre manages to pass both his saves and responds with a savage series of strikes that smites down the vampire. The round ends with the ogre victorious, and the fighters reset for round 2. The second round begins with the ogre taking cover and blasting the vampire. His aim was off, none of the shots deal any damage. The vampire tries to close the gap like last time while keeping cover. The next round, the ogre pops his potion of toughness and continues to lay fire down on the vampire, this time getting a wound. The vampire has little options now. Either hold for a turn while the potion runs out, and take an additional round of shooting, or charge into a very similar melee situation to last time, just with an even tougher ogre. She decides to charge in, the ogre again failing to land his stand and shoot attacks, but the vampire failed again to get any wounds through. Like last time, her attacks are followed up by a savage ogre beating. Afterwards, the vampire is left a truly dead, mangled corpse, and the ogre is claimed victorious. The next battle is between Hector Lefetch, the confident Bretonnian paladin, and the orc big boss, Bolgort, the cleaver. The combatants take their sides, and the orc will make the first move as the Bretonnian prays to the Lady of the Lake. Bolgort somewhat cautiously advances, leaving about 12 to 13 inches between him and the Bretonnian, as well as some spikes the horse might glance. Before Hector charges, a lovely lady in the crowd tosses down a lucky charm to the paladin. With a nod of approval, the dashing Bretonnian charges forward, managing to close the gap with the orc big boss and dodging any perils along the way. The combat is quick, as Hector's lance strikes true, and the orc fails to hold his defenses. The paladin claims round 1. The fighters reset, and Hector shows his confidence on round 2 by taking the first turn and immediately advancing forward and lining up a charge. Bolgort takes even more caution and distances himself even further this time, about 14 to 15 inches. But before the combat happens, the bridge snaps and collapses into the toxic pool, somewhat narrowing the path of Hector's charge. It matters not, as just like last round, the paladin of Bretonnia, Hector Lefetch, rolls an impressive charge and closes the gap with the orc. His lance once more strikes true, and the orc is felled, this time for real. Bolgort might have had the cutting edge in his cleaver, but it doesn't matter how sharp your blade is if you lack the speed to use it. And thus, Hector advances into the next set of matches in the Blood Ring Arena. We have a true battle of stature up next, with the elven swordmaster Teowin fighting the halfling captain Donald Stoutfoot. Both combatants having range capabilities seem to have influenced their starting positions, each leaning into some form of cover. The halfling begins and readies his mighty crossbow for a shot. However, the elf's cover proves effective, and no damage is dealt. The elf advances forward, taking a shot back at the halfling, and it nearly wounds, but luckily for the halfling, he remembered to pack his shield before the duel. The follow-up is brutal, as the halfling readies his mighty crossbow, one that strikes with the force of a dragon bow, and lands a devastating shot on the elf. The round ends quickly, with the halfling victorious. Both fighters swap sides, and round 2 begins. The elf, now realizing they might have the range disadvantage, tries to sprint towards the halfling as fast as possible, risking everything when the halfling lines up their crossbow for another shot. But he misses. Before the elf closes in, a pit fighter emerges at the center of the arena, eager to join into the oncoming brawl. The elf, unfazed by the pit fighter's presence, charges the halfling, and was luckily close enough that a stand and shoot attack couldn't be made. Now that he's closed in with his opponent, Teowin is a masterfully trained swordsman, and can easily cleave the halfling with a single attack, so it would be easy to say he has the advantage in this situation. However, he only manages to wound with one of his attacks. The halfling, now wounded, but not out, strikes back with only 2 attacks, and manages to actually cleave down the swordmaster. And the halfling prepares his crossbow during his turn, readies it at the pit fighter, and takes him down with one clean shot, and is declared the victor of this duel. And the elf gets added to the body count. I got a feeling this next duel is going to be a good one. We have another Bretonnian here today. I guess this one forgot their horse. It's Diana, the Bastion, versus Zendak, the true son. But who is Zendak the true son of? Perhaps the fabled Ben? Maybe we'll find out more, maybe we won't. What we do know is the fighters are ready, and the next duel is about to begin. The Bretonnian begins the turn praying, and the champion of chaos advances quickly towards the center of the arena. The paladin continues to pray and murmur words, trying to conjure forth some kind of divine miracle or some sort of spell, but nothing happens, and shortly after, Zendak charges the paladin, and a melee ensues. Swords clang back and forth, but the Chaos Champion's sword, a blade that seems strangely similar to one we saw earlier in the arena, strikes true, and the paladin falls. Both fighters reset after a quick first match here, and we prepare for round 2. The round begins with Zendak, again sprinting towards the paladin, while Diana prays. This time her prayers seem to be answered, and after some slight repositioning, a fireball is launched forward into the champion of chaos. However, his armor and blessings of the dark gods keep him safe from taking any damage. Zendak charges forward again, this time Diana putting all her faith into the Lady of the Lake, as she drops her shield and grips her sword with 2 hands. Zendak strikes and deals 2 wounds, but the Lady of the Lake and the Paladin's armor hold strong and no wounds are dealt. Diana readies her sword, and now her sword strikes true and deals a wound to Zendak. The combat resolution's in her favor, enough so that Zendak is pushed slightly back. Diana seizes this opportunity and moves slightly back herself, then prays one more time to her god as another wicked fireball is conjured forth, and this time blasting the champion of chaos off his feet and clear out of the arena doors. The paladin takes the second round, and the fight resets for round 3. Zendak, as always, begins the round advancing quickly forward. And for the first time of relevance in these duels, the gods of chaos have bestowed a useful blessing upon one of their warriors. His skin has become like iron, which will come in handy when during the follow-up turn here, the Bretonnian readies another fireball and hurls it into the warrior. But that temporary iron skin and his other defenses prove enough to come out of this unscathed. Other than that, the paladin backs up slightly, and Zendak begins his second turn, getting another useful +1 attack blessing. However, the distance between him and the target seems to be too great, and he only advances a cautious distance forward. Fortune continues to favor the warrior of chaos, as the paladin fails to cast another fireball. However, maybe that fortune has run out, as before the round ends, a small gang of zombies rise amongst the soil and dead of the arena and prepare to join into this fight. And it seems, at least for now, Zendak is the closest target. Zendak cares not, though, and charges the Bretonnian with his sword ready and blessings of the dark gods. He strikes. His blow is parried by the Bretonnian, who has her sword and shield ready this time. She strikes back, but also fails to deal any damage. Melee continues into the next round, with each combatant failing to deal any damage yet again. However, the situation is complicated, as zombies have entered into the arena, and a third round in the turn will begin. One group advances around the toxic pit, while the other manages to close the gap with Zendak and charge in, and another round of this melee will break out. Zendak continuously directs all of his attacks onto the paladin, and vice versa. But despite the blessings of his god, he might be considered at something of a disadvantage now that he's getting nipped in the back by zombies. Zendak does manage to get a wound in on the paladin this round. His defenses manage to hold up against both the paladin and the zombies. And it seems like for now, Zendak's morale is able to withstand being completely surrounded in this battle, and the fight will continue another round. Zendak is blessed by the gods again with something useful, receiving +1 initiative, which is just enough to strike first in the melee. However, the Lady of the Lake will not let this champion fall. The paladin survives another round, but still fails to get any wounds in on the Chaos champion. The zombies as well striking at the warrior, but he continues to pass all armor and ward saves. The other nearby zombie mob tries to charge the paladin, however, comes up short and along the way triggers a nearby flame trap, but somehow the shambling undead avoid any damage. They do just barely fail to charge and kind of surround the nearby area of the spike barricade that the paladin is using as a defense. One more round of the melee breaks out. All significant blows are parried, and everyone's defenses hold. However, the morale of being completely surrounded has finally started to wane on this Chaos champion, and Zendak fails his leadership test and weighs his odds and decides to try to run past the paladin. However, Diana is able to catch up and defeat Zendak at last in this duel. However, she's not completely out of this yet. There's still one more round left, and now she is completely surrounded by the undead. The paladin prays one more time and readies a fireball that manages to obliterate a whole group of the zombies. The other 4 charge in, and a final melee ensues. The zombies get one wound through. But Diana's armor holds true. She strikes back and kills one of the zombies. The turn ends, and whatever magical willpower was holding those zombies together dissipates as they once more collapse onto the floor of the arena. The crowd is excited with this one, as Diana is declared the winner of the duel, and it seems like during the excitement, Zendak actually managed to limp off to fight again another day. Our fighters in the next duel are Seratul, a demon sorcerer of Tzeentch, and the dwarf slayer, Fungi Bladestorm. Each take their sides, and the duel begins with Seratul failing to get his magic missile demonic familiars to cast. The dwarf seizes this moment to sprint forward and close the gap. The following turn, the demon tries to further his distance even more, while readying another magic missile. But again, no magic energy can be conjured onto this slayer. The stunty dwarf continues his relentless advance forward, and the demon is now backed into a corner, and finally able to conjure a magic missile. It blasts with 4 hits, but only 1 wound goes through. The slayer charges in, and after a quick melee, stands victorious. Both fighters reset for the second round. As the duel is about to begin, strange rumblings can be felt all through the arena, as if the footsteps of something massive is approaching. And it's not long before one of the spectators yells something out.
The monster is here!
And the gates at the center of the arena slowly begin to open, and a deep roar can be heard. In fact, many deep roars can be heard. Both the fighters know something big is about to happen, and the demon, speaking in Dwarvish tongue, offers a momentary truce to the Slayer until whatever event is about to unfold is resolved. But the dwarf will have none of this, and knows better than to trust a demon. The Slayer now has the first turn and sprints up, this time heading towards the bridge, away from whatever is about to emerge. The demon heads the same direction and readies another magic missile, this time with no shortage of energy, and obliterates the Slayer with a single blast. The demon stands confident, but only for a moment, as the horror within the gates emerges before everyone. The mighty Hydra! The demon continues to back up into a corner and readies another magic missile, dealing 2 wounds to the Hydra. A noble effort, but much more is needed to fell this beast. The Hydra charges the demon, but fails its charge and takes the first wound from a piece of dangerous terrain along the way. Maybe this demon has a chance. Saratul chooses movement over casting and sprints to the other side of the arena. As the Hydra repositions itself, the demon casts another magic missile at it, but the gods seem to have abandoned this servant as he fails to cast the spell, and the Hydra proceeds to charge. The demon and the Hydra surprisingly go blow for blow on their attacks, and the Hydra at first only gets 1 wound through, but then proceeds to thunderstomp the demon out of the arena, and this match is considered a tie. After the demon regains consciousness, the third match begins, and it's possible the demon is a little shaken after that Hydra encounter, because his first turn spell fails to cast. The dwarf sprints as fast as his little legs will let him towards the demon. Saratul responds by backing up, and this time getting the magic energy he needed for his demonic familiars. He scores 4 hits when rolling for the spell, but no damage is dealt to that thick dwarven bod. The Slayer, feeling confident in his skills, positions himself to close in with the demon on the following turn. His skills will truly be tested, as the demon conjures 1 more magic missile before the melee, rolling an impressive 10 hits. Yet, not a single one can wound this dwarven Slayer. Thungy Bladestorm charges the demon with the fury of his ancestors behind every blow, and proceeds to lay down an absolutely savage beating upon the spawn of chaos. The duel ends with the Slayer victorious, and the demon sent back to the hell spawn from whence he came. We have another dwarf up next, this one with a love of the black powder. His name is Scory Firebeard, and his opponent is a goblin assassin from faraway lands named Boda, the Finger Taker. The dwarf is going to take the first turn, and he starts pretty entrenched in. He begins with a barrage of gunfire on the goblin, but failing to hit. The goblin advances quickly around the side, using whatever cover he can. The dwarf responds by maneuvering slightly for a better angle on the goblin, but again fails to land a shot. The goblin closes in and will prepare for a charge on his next turn. The dwarf, having the perfect moment, takes his shot on the goblin and gets a wound through. But on the follow-up turn, the goblin gets the charge he's been waiting for, and is too close for a stand-and-shoot reaction to be made. The dwarf stands his ground, but stands little chance against this goblin's secret weapon. He pulls out some kind of deadly club, and proceeds to swing it with all his might, clobbering the dwarf with a mighty blow, and sending him to the arena's floor. The goblin stands victorious. After a little while, the dwarf regains consciousness, and prepares for the second round. The goblin takes the first turn, again advancing quickly forward, taking cover along the edges of the arena. However, this time Scory is not messing around. he lines up a perfect shot on the goblin, and with a bursting of flame from both his gun's barrels, lands 3 wounds on the assassin, and wins the second round with ease. Or so Scory thinks, as that all too familiar moaning of the undead starts to fill the arena. Yet again, some kind of magical energy within the arena has brought forth the dead combatants of old to fight again. Scory is right next to the undead mob and chooses to retreat as far as possible and prepare for the inevitable charge. He readies his gun, then stands and shoots at the closest group of undead charging in, while the other group shambles across the bridge. Scory manages to shoot down only one of the undead before they close in, but his dwarven armor holds strong. His axe, now at the ready, cleaves down another zombie. After the combat resolution, only one zombie remains, and it's forced to momentarily back away. Scory takes this moment to ready another shot, this time at the other mob coming across the bridge, and manages to gun down 2 more of the undead. The remaining zombie charges in for round 2, but neither side deal any significant blows and will remain locked into combat. This happens again in the next round of combat, with neither the zombie nor dwarf willing to falter. However, the situation has become grim for Scory, as the other group of undead close in, and he is now completely surrounded, and even takes a wound from the zombie attacks. The dwarf manages to kill one of the zombies that he's been tied down with during this combat for round 2. That single zombie. But he does lose the combat resolution, and has to back up a few inches. The zombies follow up, and both sides to continue to go back and forth, dealing strikes with neither willing to falter, until, once again, the magical energy that's conjured these zombies forth eventually dissipates, and the dwarf is left the last man standing, and declared the victor of this round. And a well-earned victory it was. Those zombies nearly got our stunty friend. We'll have to see which one of these stunty boys comes out on top, though, in this final match, as both fighters are now ready for round 3. The third round begins with the dwarf laying suppressive fire down on the goblin. The goblin, unfazed, and with little options, advances under fire like usual, keeping whatever cover he can. The dwarf manages to get a good shot in on the second turn, and even wound the goblin. Feeling like he's in a desperate situation, the goblin abandons his cover and sprints as quickly as possible towards the dwarf. The dwarf slightly repositions himself, and afterwards I feel like we're looking at a fairly similar situation to the first round between these two. However, the big difference is, this time the dwarf left enough distance between himself and the goblin to get a stand-and-shoot attack. He lines up his sights on the charging goblin, and blammo! The goblin is knocked down to the floor of the arena, and the dwarf is declared victorious. But yet again, during the excitement of this victory, it seemed like the goblin had enough time to regain consciousness and sneak away. Our last match is a classic match between a necromancer and a witch hunter. Both fighters take their sides and prepare for the duel. The first turn goes to the witch hunter, and he begins by sprinting quickly and shooting his pistols at the necromancer, but fails to hit. The necromancer starts his turn with an absolute tragedy, as he firmly stands his ground and fails to cast any spells. The witch hunter continues to close the gap, now ready to charge the necromancer on his follow-up turn, and this time lands a wound on the necromancer with his pistol. The necromancer continues to stand his ground, continuing to fail to cast most of his spells. He does, however, manage to conjure a small meat shield group of undead in front of him, offering some kind of defense. The witch hunter weighs his odds and decides to draw his two-handed sword and charge the zombies. He prays to his god to smite down this unholy foe, and his prayers are answered, as the wrath of a hammer hand destroys 2 of the zombies. The other two are decapitated by the Witch Hunter's blade. With none left standing, the Witch Hunter overruns into the Necromancer, and another melee begins. Surprisingly, both sides parry each other's blows on the first round, but the second is followed up by a savage swing of the Witch Hunter's blade, and the duel ends quickly with the Hunter victorious. The sides reset for round 2. The Necromancer has the first turn. He decides this time to take the Curse of Years spell, but he is lacking the range to use it on the first turn, so he only summons a mob of zombies to his defense. The Witch Hunter begins confidently sprinting towards the zombies, ready for a fight. The zombies charge, but the Necromancer fails to cast any further spells. The undead swarm the Hunter, but fail to get any wounds through, and the Witch Hunter's riposte is deadly, as he deals 2 wounds to the zombies, and the other 2 promptly crumble away. With his target now exposed, the Witch Hunter charges and swings his greatsword, knocking the Necromancer to the floor. But for some reason, the crowd was apparently won over by the bravery of the sorcerer, and they asked the Hunter to spare his life. He does deal 1 more blow to the Necromancer, as his righteous zeal would allow nothing else. But it does seem afterwards the Conjurer of the Dead was able to limp away and survive another day. And with that fight concluded, all of the first stage duels have been finished in the Blood Ring Arena. 8 combatants stand victorious, 5 have been slain, and 3 managed to live to fight another day. But who will be the first to take the crown? And what will be the next set of matches? We'll have to find out next time in the Blood Ring Arena. Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of the Blood Ring Arena. For those first-time visitors, the Blood Ring Arena is meant to be a way for Warhammer champions to test their faith and steel in a more personal 1v1 style format. The rules can be played for one-off challenges or tournaments, and we are currently in the midst of the first 100-point tournament to see who becomes king of this arena. The tournament began with 16 combatants, and now we are down to 8, who have all been paired off for the second set of today's matches. Be sure to check out part 1 if you want to know more about the tournament or rules. I have also provided resources in the description for this to be played in other formats of Warhammer, such as 8th edition, 6th, or even Mordheim. But I gotta say, so far, I think it plays really well with the old world rules we are currently using. The fighters and their opponents for this week are currently on screen, and the first match between Garen Eagle-Eye and Diana the Bastion should begin shortly. The crowds are beginning to gather outside, and this should be another day of packed stands in the arena. It's looking like the fans have found their seats, and it's going to be another packed day in the arena, and the fighters are approaching the ring. Get ready for part 2 of the Blood Ring Arena. The fighters take their positions, and while Diana prays to the Lady of the Lake, Garen advances quickly. Diana takes cover and prays again until at the tip of her finger, a divine light begins to brighten with the intensity and size of a fireball and blasts the Witch Hunter for massive damage. The first round is over quick, with the Paladin victorious. It should be noted that Garen did have the foresight to take the Magic Resistance 2 Witch Hunter Creed, but it wasn't enough to stop the intensity of that spell. both fighters reset and prepare for round 2. The paladin again prays to the Lady of the Lake, and the witch hunter advances forward. Diana takes some cover and tries to conjure another fireball, but fails to do so. The witch hunter continues their advance, this time taking some pistol shots at the paladin and landing a wound. Diana again tries to conjure another fireball, but her prayers go unanswered. The witch hunter sees this as his moment to strike and draws his two-handed sword, then charges the paladin, striking over some spiked barricades and debris in between the two. He gets one wound through, but the paladin's blessing of the Lady of the Lake keeps her safe. The paladin strikes back and also gets a wound in on the witch hunter, but he doesn't have any kind of ward save to keep him safe. So after he fails his armor save, that wound goes through, and the blow staggers the witch hunter back. The paladin holds her ground, and during her turn, prays again for another fireball. And her prayers are answered. Another deadly fireball blasts the witch hunter, and after the smoke clears, the duel is over. Diana stands victorious. Garen the Witch Hunter sustained far too great damage from those fireballs and is added to the arena's body count. We move on to the second duel with the Bretonnian Hector Lefetch and the proud halfling Donald Stoutfoot. The fighters take their side, and again we have another Bretonnian praying to the Lady of the Lake, meaning their opponent will automatically begin the duel the first turn. Donald takes position and shoots his crossbow. He hits the target, but somehow he fails to wound. Hector quickly advances forward, putting not much distance between him and his target. Donald, seeing not many options, decides to lunge forward and charge the Bretonnian. Both engage in what, I am not kidding, is 2 full turns of non-stop parrying. The halfling passing an impressive amount of armor saves during the 2 turns, but also flubbing almost every attack with non-stop 1s and 2s on his hit rolls or wound rolls. The paladin rolling an impressive amount of hits each time during these parrying blows back and forth, but he's often choking when it comes to rolling his wounds. It's not all parrying back and forth forever, though, because after 2 turns of no progress on either side, Hector Lefetch strikes with his sword and finally gets a wound on the halfling. And shortly afterwards, his steed capitalizes on the momentum and stomps the halfling for the final wound. The first round goes to the Bretonnian. Shortly afterwards, the second round begins. Donald, enraged from the disrespect handed to him in the last duel, readies his crossbow and aims right for Hector. A critical hit that knocks the paladin from his saddle and quickly ends the second round. His steed manages to nudge Hector onto his back, and the two quickly retreat and recoup for the third round. Everything's all tied up, and after a bit of time, both fighters are ready. Donald begins things with his signature crossbow shot, but this time, Hector's armor holds strong. The paladin charges forward, this time giving a little more distance between himself and the halfling, but not enough to allow his opponent a stand-and-shoot reaction. The halfling sees a similar situation to last time, but convinces himself his swordsmanship will be much better this time around as he charges the Bretonnian. The paladin drops his lance and draws his sword and readies himself for another melee with the halfling. Donald's charge and swordsmanship do seem to be a bit more on point this time, as he manages to get a wound in on the paladin. However, Hector is quicker to strike as well, and manages to also get a wound in on Donald. Both fighters stand their ground and go for another round of the melee. Both opponents strike valiantly, but unfortunately, Donald's swordsmanship proves to be no match for a Bretonnian paladin. And after a few more strikes back and forth, the halfling is defeated, and Hector Lefetch is declared the victor. After the duel, it does seem that this little lucky halfling general regained consciousness and will live to fight another day. The third duel between Scory Firebeard and Kurgi Bigtooth is about to begin. Both fighters take their sides, and as Scory begins readying his first shot on the ogre, two ill omens fall upon him. The first is he misses his shot. The second is that it seems the gods have cursed Scory. We'll have to see how this curse comes into effect later on. The ogre advances forward, shooting his pistols at the dwarf, but failing to hit. The second turn begins, and Scory gets an amazing shot on the ogre. One of the wounds was normal, but the other one was a 6, triggering the handgun's armor bane ability. The ogre fails both saves and is barely hanging in, when suddenly at the start of his turn, a blessing of the gods befalls him and heals one of his wounds. The ogre drinks his potion of toughness, then continues his steady advance, laying suppressive fire down with his pistols, but again failing to get any wounds through. Scory sacrifices shooting this turn and repositions with just enough distance to get a stand and shoot attack. The ogre charges, and Scory takes his shot. However, the god's curse comes into play and stops his hit from landing. It seems this dwarf's fate might be sealed. Both draw their melee weapons, and the ogre gets one wound through on the dwarf. And Scory is backed up into a corner. With every inch given, the ogre continues his relentless attack. Scory does manage to get one wound in on the ogre, but eventually his defenses fall, and Kurgi Bigtooth is declared the victor of the first round. If the gods hadn't blessed that ogre, though, and also cursed Scory, he would have taken that round. But alas, the gods work in mysterious ways, and both fighters must accept their fate and continue into the second round. Kurgi Bigtooth drinks his potion of toughness right away and advances forward, shooting his pistols but not getting any wounds through. The dwarf responds with taking some cover and failing to wound the ogre as well. Turn 2, the ogre tries to cut off the dwarf and get around his flank and hopefully prevent any movement shenanigans. He also fails to get any damage through with his pistols, yet again. Scory abandons his cover, backing up just enough distance to get a stand and shoot attack on the ogre, and also take a wild shot that does manage to hit and get 2 wounds in on the ogre. The ogre still prepares himself for his charge and begins barreling towards the dwarf. Scory readies his gun for his stand and shoot attack, and blam! His gun's barrels let out a mighty shot that lands another wound on the ogre. Kurgi is knocked over, and Scory claims round 2. Everything is now all tied up, and after both fighters have recovered, we move on to round 3. Round 3 starts with Scory getting a nasty shot, dealing 2 wounds on Kurgi Bigtooth. The ogre begins his advance forward and drinks his potion of toughness. Scory readies another shot, but the ogre's defenses, combined with the effect of that potion of toughness, are too much for the bullets to have any kind of effect. When the ogre starts his next turn, the gods yet again bless him and heal a wound. It seems nothing is going to stop this ogre from claiming his victory against this dwarf. The ogre continues advancing, laying suppressive fire on the dwarf. Scory, knowing the ogre is about to charge him, decides to forego shooting this turn and sprints out of the ogre's charge arc. The ogre repositions and prepares to charge the dwarf on the following turn. While doing so, he shoots his pistols and gets a nasty shot in on the dwarf, dealing 1 wound. Scory continues to back up and takes a quick reaction shot while doing so, but fails to hit. This is the moment the ogre's been waiting for here. That annoying little dwarf is finally within his charge arc, and it's a short distance away. The ogre begins to charge towards Scory, when suddenly, a drunken wizard in the crowd carelessly lets a fireball get flung into the arena, and it hits the ogre for massive damage. The ogre falls to the ground, and a loud thud echoes across the arena. The fight is somehow over before Scory even had a chance to stand and shoot. It even seems the fireball proved to be fatal to the ogre. Scory is declared the winner, and we move on to the final duel. We have our Dwarf Slayer getting paired up against yet another caster. And on paper, it kind of seems like it's a one-sided fight. I think pretty much in favor of the Slayer here, since they have some built-in magic resistance for their profile. But pay attention throughout the fight. There's actually a good amount of opportunities, I think, for both fighters, honestly, to take the win. And it ends up being a pretty close one. The fight begins with Lady Adamara casting her signature spell, the magic missile, the Summoning, yet unfortunately it fails to cast. Hungi sprints forward, and when we get to the elf's turn, 2 mistakes occur on her part. The first is, she seemed to position herself poorly, as right in the crowd above her is a lot of angry dwarf spectators, and one particularly rowdy one throws a rock at the dark elf, dealing a wound. If I had to guess, this also threw her momentum off this turn, because her second mistake was failing to cast her spell. The dwarf spends 1 more turn advancing forward. The dark elf sorceress, having nowhere else to run to, tries 1 more time to desperately cast her magic missile, but yet again fails the roll. Thungi Bladestorm charges in with the fury of his ancestors behind each strike, and he lands an impressive 3 wounds and 2 killing blows on the roll there. The elf, having no real defenses to speak of, is quickly defeated, and we move on to round 2. Round 2 is a bit of a strange one. To give the long story short, the dwarf spends the entire round sprinting and charging this elf, but somehow always rolling a 1 and 2 on his charge dice. Every single time. The elf fails to get a single magic missile wound to go through on this dwarf the entire battle, and spends most of her time fleeing and sprinting for her life. By the end of the duel, both fighters had almost sprinted around the entire arena. The timer eventually runs out, and neither fighter was wounded. The round is considered a draw. The dwarf, no joke, rolled 3 failed charges over the duel, and the sorceress had a total of 1 successful magic missile, but it failed to get any wounds through. I think she rolled like 3 on the to hit roll on the 2d6, maybe 4. And then she just spent the entire game repositioning herself, and the dwarf doing the same thing. It was really a battle of positioning that neither side came out on top. Round 3 begins, and quite surprisingly, this one's going to end rather quickly, with the dwarf sprinting across the bridge and finally getting blasted by a potent magic missile from the sorceress, dealing an impressive 5 wounds to the Slayer. Round 3 goes to the Dark Elf Sorceress, and somehow, now things are all tied up, and we are going to the first tiebreaker. Round 4 starts with the dwarf sprinting to the bridge, and the elf failing to cast her magic missile. The second round, the dwarf corners the side the elf was on of the arena. She responds by shifting over to the other side of the arena and unfortunately rolling a miscast on her spell. However, her Dark Elf special rule prevented her from taking any severe damage, like from a miscast or anything, but the magic missile still did fail to cast. The dwarf tries to charge the elf, but comes up short yet again. And while doing so, he gets a bottle from the stands thrown at him, no doubt from a dwarf hater. However, Fungi Bladestorm has got very quick reflexes and manages to dodge the incoming bottle. The Dark Elf repositions herself yet again and actually gets her spell to go off this turn. And it does an impressive 8 hits. But when rolling to wound, no damage is done to that impressive dwarven physique. Fungi Bladestorm, yet again with the fury of his ancestors behind him, charges the elf. She eventually decides to flee during this moment. But with his little stunty legs, he sprints as fast as he can, and he eventually catches the sorceress. Surprisingly, Fungi only gets 1 wound in on the elf, and she actually manages to go blow for blow with the Slayer, dealing 1 wound back. Both fighters stand their ground and go for another round in the melee. 1 more exchange is all it takes, though, as Fungi lands another savage blow upon the elf, knocking her to the arena floor, and Fungi is declared the victor of the duel. Afterwards, it does seem that Lady Adamara managed to recover from her wounds and will live to fight another day. The third matchups are going to be interesting now. With an entirely Bretonnian and dwarf cast, we'll have to see what faction can take the arena crown. Find out next time in the Blood Ring Arena. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the epic conclusion video of our Blood Ring Arena tournament. We began with 16 combatants, and we are down to the final 4. Surprisingly, the tournament finalists consist entirely of dwarves and Bretonnians. The first duel will begin shortly, with the crowd favorite, Hector Lefetch, up against the Slayer, Fungi Bladestorm. The crowds are packed and excited. It's a very bright, sunny day for the final matches. The fighters have taken their positions. Let the first duel begin. Hector prays to the Lady of the Lake, and Fungi takes the first turn. He moves cautiously around the side of the arena while keeping his eyes locked on the Bretonnian. Hector has a decent amount of ground to cover, but decides to immediately charge the dwarf. Hector's steed swiftly charges across the arena, and a fight has already ensued between the Dwarven Steel and Bretonnian lance. Fungi raises his axe in an attempt to parry the incoming lance, but Hector's lance strikes with the same swiftness of his steed. The dwarf is run down in a single gallant charge. Hector takes the first round. Fungi again decides to cautiously advance up the side of the arena. Hector this time seems to deem the distance between the two of them too great, and instead advances a cautious distance about halfway up the arena. Fungi continues to shift up the sides of the arena, when suddenly Hector and his steed lunge forward and charge the dwarf. Again, Hector's lance does manage to get a hit on the dwarf, but not with the same force as last time. He only manages to get 1 wound in. And surprisingly, Fungi is able to ready his axe, strike back, and actually get a wound on the Bretonnian as well, tying up the combat. Both fighters prepare for the second round of the melee, and attack at the exact same time. Each fighter readies their weapons, and really winds back for a savage blow upon their opponent. And unfortunately for each of them, it seems like each of their hits land, and they both knock each other to the ground simultaneously. The fight is considered a draw for this round, and after eventually both of them regain consciousness, we'll reset and prepare for round 3. It seems like after that prior match, Fungi has gained a little bit of confidence, and he begins this third round by basically moving out into the open ground of the arena and prepares to face his opponent head on. When Hector begins his turn, he advances forward, and the crowd begins to cheer both the fighters' names. It seems they've been really won over with the spectacle of this duel so far. Many thumbs up are given, and the fight continues. Hector sees his target straight ahead and makes yet another grand charge at the dwarf. Hector's lance seemingly strikes the dwarf down, dealing 2 wounds. When suddenly, Fungi makes one last-ditch effort to swing his axe at the paladin, and he actually manages to knock him from the saddle one more time before the duel ends. Eventually, Fungi does manage to recover from his injuries, but since the Blood Ring Arena is a best-of-3 competition, it is Hector that is declared the winner. Our next set of fighters are the Bretonnian Paladin, Diana the Bastion, versus the Dwarven Engineer, Scory Firebeard. Each take their sides, and the fight begins with Scory firing his gun at the Paladin, but failing to hit. Diana chooses to sprint forward and close the gap as quickly as possible with her Dwarven adversary. Scory reloads his gun and prepares another shot, when the crowd above starts booing the fighters and demanding blood be spilled. Scory fires his gun, but yet again misses, no doubt distracted by the antics of the crowd. Diana continues her advance, moving forward from one piece of cover to the next, and now she is nearly closed in on her target. Scory refuses to miss 3 times in a row, and loads a bit of extra powder into his weapon. The thunder of the shot rips through the arena and into Diana's armor, but luckily she readies her shield in time and manages to just barely survive the attack. The paladin now draws her sword and charges the dwarf, but unfortunately for her, Scory was quick to ready his next attack. During his stand and shoot, he guns the paladin down. Both fighters reset to their appropriate sides and prepare for round 2. The next round begins with Scory readying his rifle but missing his first shot. Diana decides to switch up her tactics a little bit. She still advances forward and is taking cover from Scory's range attacks, but she decides to try to use her ruby ring and cast a fireball upon the dwarf. Unfortunately, she doesn't roll high enough and the spell fails to cast. At the start of the second turn, Scory loads in a little bit of extra black powder for this shot. Again, the gunshot rips a thunderous echo through the arena. And before the round had much time to begin, the paladin falls to the ground, and Scory is declared the winner. Scory and his opponent Hector now prepare themselves for their final duel to see who will become the first king of this arena. After some time, both fighters take their sides, and the final duel begins. Scory takes the first turn and misses his shot on the paladin. Hector begins his advance forward when suddenly an old trap on the arena's floor has been sprung. However, Hector and his steed are quick to react and narrowly avoid falling into whatever type of trap pit thing emerged in front of them. The paladin advances forward about halfway across the arena and prepares his charge on the dwarf. Unfortunately, things got a little hazy during the commotion of the duel. It even got a little hard to see what was going on due to some blinding sunlight. And we aren't quite sure if Scory took 1 shot or 2. Regardless, Hector was able to charge into the dwarf, but not without taking a wound along the way. Again, this could have been during the dwarves' shooting phase or the stand and shoot reaction. Things got a little too hazy for us to recall. Regardless, Hector readies his lance, and with a little help from his trusty steed, Hector is able to run down the dwarf in the first round of a combat. The fighters reset, and round 2 begins. Scory, angered by his defeat, loads even more powder into the barrel of his gun and aims for the knight's head, and with a thunderous boom, knocks Hector from his saddle and takes a quick victory for round 2. Everything's all tied up now, and it could all be decided right here. Both fighters have the chance to win it all, but who can actually take it? The third round begins, and yet again, Scory hits the paladin with a thunderous gunshot. However, this time, Hector's defenses are just barely able to withstand the blow. Wounded, but not out, Hector readies his steed and begins charging forward. But unbeknownst to the paladin, a drunken wizard in the crowd readies a lightning bolt and flings it at the paladin's back. But yet again, Hector's defenses hold strong, and he manages to survive the attack. Hector does not declare a charge, but instead moves close enough to the dwarf to deny a stand-and-shoot reaction. Scory weighs his odds and decides to retreat back about 3 inches, just barely enough movement to grant him that stand-and-shoot reaction that he desires, and also make a desperate quick shot at the paladin during his turn. The quick shot misses, and Hector responds with a full-on charge. Scory's second shot was actually quite impressive. I believe it did 2 wounds, but Hector's defenses, yet again, are just barely able to hold through. I believe he passed one of the armor saves that was required on those 2 wounds, and then the Lady of the Lake saved him on a 6-up ward save for that final wound. The paladin charges in with his lance at the ready. Both parties exchange attacks. Scory is left wounded, but barely hanging in. The next round, Hector attacks first, but during these moments that matter most, he fails to land any damage. Scory, arguably the underdog in a melee situation, somehow lands a single hit against the paladin, and the wound strikes through Hector's armor into his chest. Blood pours out, and the knight falls for one last time from his saddle. Hector has been defeated, and Scory is declared the first ever king of the Blood Ring Arena. Scory now sits upon the throne overlooking the arena, resting, waiting for whatever champions we have lined up for next time in the Blood Ring Arena. Thanks to everyone for checking out this custom game mode, and a really special thank you to everyone who watched the tournament all the way through. I can safely say I didn't expect a dwarven engineer to be the one to take the throne, but here we are. If you have any questions about the way the scenario works, or perhaps ideas of things to add, maybe heroes that you would like to see in future videos, please leave them in the comments below. I already know a few of you have left some comments in the prior videos I've posted, and I really appreciate that. And I'll do my best to try to work some of those things into future content here for the Blood Ring Arena. Anyways, folks, that's going to just about wrap this video up, or this video series. Have a great day, and I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.